chapter 23. Acts chapter 23 is where we're picking up this morning. And let's see, remember last time what we'd gone through is where Paul had been able to address his fellow Hebrews under the direction and guidance of the proconsul that was taking care of him, that gave him an opportunity to be able to address and talk back and forth, and there was the struggle there, but Paul was able to recount his conversion, right? His coming to know the Lord and meeting him on the road to Damascus and being able to talk with him through that. And then we saw where he brought him in, they were going to stretch him out and beat him, and then Paul brings out that he's a Roman citizen, so he puts the stop on all that. And so now in chapter 23, it's like things have kind of calmed down a little bit, right? It's been a couple of days, or it's been a day, and so now, again, the proconsul is trying to get this figured out. So he calls some of the elders and the folks of the Hebrews and of the Israelites, of their religious elite leadership, so that they can all hash it out, if you will, figure this out and find out what the problem is and what's going on. Because remember, in the beginning, the proconsul guy thought that Paul was some Egyptian who was leading a bunch of assassins in the desert to stir up problems, right? And Paul's like, no, that's not me. Right, so the proconsul, he needs to get things kind of figured out and squared away. So we're going to start just a little bit before chapter 23 and verse 30 here as we come down. But on the next day, desiring to know the real reason why he was being accused by the Jews, he unbound him and commanded the chief priests and all the council to meet. And he brought Paul down and set him before them. And looking intently at the council, Paul said, "Brothers, I have lived my life before God in all good conscience up to this day." And the high priest Annas commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, "God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Are you sitting to judge me according to the law, and yet contrary to the law, you order me to be struck?" Those who stood by said, "Would you revile God's high priest?" And Paul said, "I did not know, brothers, that he was the high priest. For it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people." Now when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other were Pharisees, he cried out to the council, "Brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees. It is with respect to the hope and the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial." And when he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, nor angel, nor spirit. But the Pharisees acknowledge them all. Then a great clamor arose, and some of the scribes of the Pharisees' party stood up and contended sharply, "We find nothing wrong in this man. What if a spirit or an angel spoke to him?" And when the dissension became violent, the tribune, afraid that Paul would be torn to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him away from among them by force and bring him into the barracks. The following night the Lord stood by him and said, "Take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify also in Rome." So now we start off with this part here, right? So we have Paul and we have the council, and Paul starts off. How does he describe himself in living his life up to this point? In good conscience, right? So in good conscience, Paul stood there holding the coats of those who were stoning Stephen. In good conscience, he went into the homes of Christians and grabbed them, hauled them off, and took them to be imprisoned. In good conscience, he, after having his interaction with Christ, then he began teaching and preaching and living the gospel and doing what Christ had called him to do, to be the one to bring the gospel to the Gentiles. So what does that tell us, or what does that teach us about conscience? Right. Just because you feel okay with it, don't make it right. You know, the conscience is something that is trainable, something that is teachable, because it's based on essentially the principles that you internally hold to be true and to be substantive, something that you can build your life on, that you can make decisions off of, right? And so you have, or we all have, a certain set of principles internally, and that's what we make our decisions off of. When we make decisions that go against those internal principles, now we're going against our conscience, and we have guilt, right? That we feel bad because we've made a decision or we've done something that goes against those basic principles, right? Well, if your basic principles are not built on what God teaches you, then you cannot trust your conscience to know what is morally right or what is morally wrong, right? So when we think about the conscience, I always think of it in a sense as kind of a good rule of thumb, right? You can sort of eyeball a situation with your conscience, but you cannot use your conscience as the definitive rule, right? I'm not the worst carpenter in the world, but I'm not a good one by any stretch, right? And I can take two pieces of wood and I can eyeball them and I can nail them together and say, yeah, that's square. Put a square on it and you're like, oh man, right? Or you try and build a structure and it's kind of leaning to a 20-degree angle. You're like, nah, you missed something up in there, buddy. You didn't have it right somewhere, because I was just eyeballing it and I wasn't setting it next to the square to make sure that every angle was proper and everything was plumb and done right, you know? And so when we try to live our spiritual lives off of our conscience, it's kind of like trying to be a carpenter who does it, you know, by eyeball. Now, I've worked with people before who are really good carpenters, have done it so long, they've got it figured. They can eyeball it and say, that ain't right, right? They can do it. They can fix it. And they know, even without putting the instrument on it. But how do they know that? How is it that a carpenter gets to that ability? Practice, right? He's done it a lot, right? He didn't start off just eyeballing it and trying to get good at it. He started off using the square, measuring every single angle, measuring every single cut, measuring everything, and making the mistakes, right? You take, and I'm the worst at this, I'll measure a spot, I'll measure the board, I'll measure the spot, I'll measure the board, I'll cut it, and it's going to be off. It'll be short or it'll be long. I'm hoping it's long because then I can take some more off, because if it's short, then I'm done. Then I got to figure out how to do a redneck patch to make it work, right? And that's kind of hard to do. But when you do it, you practice it, then you begin to develop that skill, right? And that's exactly what we've read in Hebrews chapter 5, where he talks about how you should be teachers by now, but you need someone else to teach you again the basic principles, right? And he says, you've been living on milk and not on the solid meat. He said you have to get into the word of righteousness and you have to practice it so you can know and understand what the will of the Lord is, right? So we have to read it, we have to understand it, and then we have to practice it, right? And then that begins to develop what? A trained conscience, right? A conscience that we can now kind of have a little bit of what's the word? Not faith, but trust in, right? You can begin to trust your conscience more and more the more it's been trained, the more it's been developed, and the more the principles that you make your decisions on come from God's Word, right? You know, intrinsically, right? I mean, the Bible already has told us there's a way that seems right to a man, but the end therein is death, right? So we have to be very careful with that. What else does Paul specifically tell us about the conscience? 1 Corinthians chapter 8 is kind of one of the key areas that Paul talks about the conscience. First Corinthians chapter 8, I'm going to start here in verse 7. It's he's talking about the eating of meat or not eating of meat that had been sacrificed to idols and things of that nature. And he says in verse 7, however, not all possess this knowledge, but some, through former association with idols, eat food as really offered to an idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. Food will not commend us to God. We are no worse off if we do eat, nor worse off if we do not eat, nor better off if we do. But take care that this right of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. For anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will he not be encouraged if his conscience is weak to eat food offered to idols? And so by your knowledge, this weak person is destroyed. The brother for whom Christ died, thus sinning against your brothers and wounding their conscience when it is weak. You sin against Christ. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. What is it that makes the weak conscience in this individual? Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Right. Yeah. Not even real. Then it has no. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. No. Right. Right. Yeah. So we have to be thoughtful about those principles, right? That kind of define what our conscience is. We have to be thoughtful about our other brothers and sisters in Christ and what they hold, right? And so, like in the specific case here, he's saying their conscience is weak, like Dad said, for a lack of understanding, a lack of knowledge, a lack of training of that conscience. Yes, sir. Mm. Yeah, right. Yeah, they'll step in there with you. It's like you're encouraging them to go against what they think is right. Yeah, and so even though it doesn't matter in their mind if they hold it as being sinful and then they participate in it, well, now it's sin, right? And we see that also where Paul talks in Corinthians about the conscience. You know, to the one that it is sinful to eat meat and they eat meat, yeah, it's a sin. Because now they are going against what they think is right. And so they are eating as if to worship the idol, or they are eating in a manner, or participating in something that they feel is wrong, right? And so therefore that their conscience being weak and being not properly trained means that they're sinning against God, right? But the things about it that are brought out is that the conscience is trainable, is teachable, and we can strengthen or weaken our own and one another's conscience by how we act and react with each other in life, right, in the things that we do. And so we need to be thoughtful about that with other folks. We need to be thoughtful about our own conscience and constantly be going back to the Word so that we can have a better established foundation set of principles that we do make good, sound decisions from, so that we can trust our conscience and have a certain modicum of being able to trust in that. Because when you're in life, you don't have the opportunity to go, oh, hold on, let me read about that. Okay, let me see what Jesus said about this. No, right? You should have already kind of done that, so that you have those basic foundation and framework and principles upon which you make good decisions to move forward with, right? And then as you learn more and more, those are developed and those are nuanced and those are established and rooted so that the conscience can be a guide that you can work with.
man is always tried to lay down rules for all of us to live by.
Yeah.
They talk about, it may be the law, it may not be right.
Right.
Against the law, but then they talk about the spirit of the law.
Right. What's the intended meaning? Right.
Get it right.
Yes, sir.
But they still, there's no way that any of the laws of man can, but you judge the heart.
Right.
Christ is
Right. Yes. Well, and it reflects what David writes. I think it's Psalm 19 or 119. I think it is, where he in his prayer he says, "May the words of my mouth, may the actions of my hands be acceptable in your sight. O Lord, my God, my rock and my redeemer." And so he's addressing the heart. He's addressing his thoughts. He's addressing his conscience. He's addressing all of those things that do shape and mold and push us in the direction of making good decisions. But again, that conscience, we have to be careful with it, because it is something that is moldable, right? And depending on who our friends are, who we hang out with, what we watch on TV, what we listen to, what we're bombarded with throughout, that is also always affecting our conscience, right? Our culture that we live in will begin to try to affect and change those basic principles that we base our decisions off of, right? And we see in Paul that, yes, those things can be dramatically different, because he went from killing folks who claimed Christ as the Son of God to being the one who proclaimed and trying to encourage others to proclaim that Christ is the Son of God, right? Based on proper understanding, education, and knowing who Jesus actually is, right? And we can see those significant shifts and changes in people's lives who are open to what the Holy Spirit wants to teach. Who are open to hear that, to understand it, and then grab hold of it, right? We've heard that a lot in Hebrews, to hold fast to those things, to hold fast to your confession and your confidence and your hope in Him, and let Him do His work. All right, now he goes on, as he says this, and obviously the high priest doesn't like what he has to say, right? And he says, somebody hit him in the mouth. And you're like, wait a minute. And Paul responds with this insult. And he says, God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Are you sitting to judge me according to the law, and yet contrary to the law, order me to be struck? What is the meaning of Paul's insult in calling him a whitewashed wall? Yeah, right. You're pretending to be one thing, right? You're play acting, because the idea of the word hypocrite is it comes from the roots are in like being an actor, right? Being someone who is portraying a particular role. And so he's saying, essentially, he's calling him a hypocrite and saying that you're acting as though you're this prim and proper and good thing, yet you're acting in opposition to what the law teaches. So you're going to stand here and say, I'm a representative of the law, and then outside of going against what the very law teaches that you're standing for, you're going to have Paul struck in the mouth, right? And so he's bringing that out in an allegorical kind of a way, or metaphorical kind of way, to be able to have a strong resonance, one, with the individual, but then with everyone around. Because who does this guy turn out to be? He's the high priest, right? And so now step farther, right? And that kind of shows us to a degree, and we've seen this, right, with what happened with Jesus. We've seen this with what happened with the apostles. But even again here, the higher level of power or position, if you will, that the teachers of the law had, so this guy being the high priest. Remember, after we've gone through the book of Hebrews, it was the high priest only that went into the Holy of Holies once a year. Is the only person in really all of humanity at that time, once a year, that could go before the Lord, right? Only one person. And that's who this guy is, right? And now here he is playing the role of a hypocrite, playing the role of being, well, I'm the one who has everything right, therefore, whatever I say goes, right? He's using his position to justify what he wants to do, right? And that is a very human trait, right? That's what as humans, we tend to always struggle with, right? They say power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? Well, he's gone to the point where the very foundation of his power he's undermining because he's going against what the law is telling and what is teaching. And, and so that's, again, we've seen that over and over again with the leadership and with the folks that are dealing with all of this stuff, because they can't actually put together a true legal argument because their own argument undermines itself, right? One of the arguments that's in today's like philosophical world within our cultural world is the idea that they say that there is no absolute truth. Do you believe that absolutely? Yes. You see how that cuts its own throat, right? It don't work. If you absolutely say there is no absolute truth, well, then the statement itself contradicts itself. So it doesn't have any substance, right? It's not true, because in saying there's no absolute truth, but you're saying that is an absolute truth, now you cut your own throat, if you will. And that's what these guys are doing, right? They're standing on the law, but at the same time, they're chipping away at the law, not following it actually, not being the ones who are upholding it properly, right? Even though they're the ones that say that they are. And so, again, it's a human thing. It's a human response. And we have to be watchful for it within ourselves as we live our lives, right? When we start to think we've got it figured out, you need to sit down and take a minute and check yourself, right? And come back to where the Word teaches and where Christ meets us and what are the barriers and the struggles that we deal with every day in our life, because we all deal with them. Okay, so now Paul in this group, right? We have this group of folks here, and he recognizes you got some that are Sadducees and some that are Pharisees, and he kind of gives us some of the differences there, right? So what is it that's the three primary differences that separate the Sadducees and the Pharisees that's brought out here? Yeah, so the Sadducees, they say there is no resurrection. That's why we say they're sad, you see, right? Because they don't believe in the resurrection. So they don't believe in that. The Pharisees do. What else? They don't believe in angels, right? The Sadducees don't believe in angels. The Pharisees do. What else? The Spirit, right? The Sadducees don't believe in or have the idea that we have a spirit, right? We have a soul. They don't believe that, whereas the Pharisees do, right? And so Paul, recognizing that this is the group that's in front of him, he uses that knowledge to then essentially divide the group. And right, any house divided against itself is not going to stand, right? And so he brings this point out and says, the reason I'm being brought here today is because I believe in the hope and the resurrection. And so then that makes an uproar where they start arguing back and forth with themselves, right? And splits the group, so now they don't have a unified voice, right? And then now, actually, the Pharisees, some of them start getting on Paul's side. And they're like, well, maybe an angel did talk to him. Maybe, a spirit did talk to him, something to that effect, to open his eyes to know what's going on. And so then you have this split, this arguing, this division and dissension that's going on within the group that are accusing him, right? And then that, obviously, like most times, descends into chaos, and then the tribune has to go in and pull Paul out so that he doesn't get tore up by these guys as they start arguing back and forth. But Paul is very smart in how he handles things. He looks intently into the people that are there, and then, like we've talked about before, he kind of meets them where they are, right? And he uses the knowledge of who they are, what they believe, to, again, try to bring the gospel, to bring Christ into the situation, right? And seriously, that is a big piece of why he's being brought up, because he believes in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. None of them did. None of them believed that he was the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God. But because he believed that, that's the primary reason that he's there, right? And so as he brings that out, then that separates everybody who's there. Now, we have a prophecy here in verse 11. What is the Lord telling Paul? Right. So we get a couple of things out of this. What are some things that we can draw out of that prophecy? That as he has testified in Jerusalem, so he will also testify in Rome. What are some things that Paul then can draw from that or glean from that? Yeah. These boys out here that are mad at you, they ain't going to kill you, right? If they do, it's going to be after you've made it to Rome and done the proclamation there, right? And so he can infer, he can understand that this is not the end. These are not the people that are going to kill him today, at this time. Because God has another mission for him to fulfill, right? And it doesn't mean that it's going to be easy, right? I mean, as many of you read before and have studied, he goes through all kinds of stuff just getting to Rome, right? I mean, there are multiple plots for his murder, shipwreck, being on the island. I think it's where he gets bit by the snake. You know, all those things that happen before he ever even gets there. So Jesus here, he doesn't tell him it's going to be, a Silk Road from here, on to Rome, right? But he just says, you will testify as you have for me here, you will there as well. And so that gives Paul, or it should give any one of us, a huge amount of confidence to say, okay, I don't have to worry about this, right? But we have that right now as well, right? When we encounter the stuff of life and people threaten us or the world is trying to entice us in other ways and other things, we can say, no, you don't own me, and you're not going to be able to kill me. You're not going to be able to take anything away from me that God doesn't allow. And if you take this physical life, that's fine. I've got eternal life with him. Right? We can have that similar kind of boldness because we know that God has a plan and purpose for us. And we walk down that path. We follow that path that he has set for us. And we should and can do so with confidence and with boldness in our lives. Just like Paul has the opportunity to do here because of the prophecy that's been given to him by Jesus as he's standing there in this situation. And you just kind of think, how much of a struggle that would be being there, right? Being under Roman guard, having your countrymen trying to kill you, all of the things and all the stuff that he's walking through and going through. And then we can step into our lives today and see the stuff and the struggle within our own culture and how we stand against those things. And then from that, we get ridicule. From that, we get blowback. From that, we get a lot of struggle and difficulty. But nothing to the point where we got people that are going to be plotting to kill us. You know what I mean? Nothing where we have that level that we have to be concerned or worried with. At least not in America right now. Now, there are other countries around the world where, they will kill you. They will chop your hand off. They will do those things if you become a Christian. All right, any other points or comments on those sections there? All right, let's move on here to verse 12. When it was day, the Jews made a plot and bound themselves by oath neither to eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. So here we go, right off the bat. Right after Jesus says, hey, you're going to go testify me in Rome, we've got the Jews making plots to kill him. And not just like, well, I don't really like Paul. Maybe we'll get together and we'll... No, they said, we're not going to eat until we get this man killed. So they're very ardent about this. It's very... it's not just like a whim kind of a thing. It's very important to them. Verse 13, there were more than 40 who made this conspiracy. They went to the chief priests and elders and said, we have strictly bound ourselves by an oath to taste no food till we have killed Paul. Now, therefore, you, along with the council, give notice to the tribune to bring him down as though you were going to determine his case more exactly. And we are ready to kill him before he comes near. Now the son of Paul's sister heard of their ambush, so he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Paul called one of the centurions and said, take this young man to the tribune, for he has something to tell him. So he took him and brought him to the tribune and said, Paul the prisoner called me and asked me to bring this young man to you, as he has something to say to you. The tribune took him by hand and going aside asked him privately, what is it that you have to tell me? And he said, the Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire somewhat more closely about him. But do not be persuaded by them, for more than 40 of their men are lying in ambush for him, who have bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now they are ready, waiting for your consent. So the tribune dismissed the young man, charging him to tell no one that you have informed me of these things. So again, the whitewashed wall thing, that whole situation. Is it okay under the old law to lay in wait and premeditatedly set up an ambush to kill somebody that you don't agree with? No, it's not, right? Yet, chief priests, council, all those folks, these 40 men, right, that's what they're ready to do, right? And, again, we go back to before, whenever they first laid hands on Paul, Paul is not angry at them. He's not holding any animosity toward them. He wants them to know Jesus in the same way that he does, because he understands. He used to be just like them, right? But he wants them to hear and know about Jesus. But as we know from verse 11, Paul can have trust and faith and know that God's going to take care of him, right? Even if it is through his nephew, a young man who happens to hear this conspiracy and is able to make things happen. All right, next Sunday morning we'll pick up there in verse 23, and we'll see as Paul goes before these different rulers and how those positions, how he works through that. Any comments or questions before we close down? I know, right? Yeah, I kind of always thought the same thing. Did they, like after a week or so, be like, well, that thing we said, maybe, I don't know. I don't know. Hopefully they did, repent from that and then come out of it. But I don't know. To me, that's a hard way to die. I don't think I want to do that. All right. Class is yours. Thank you very much.